Okay, there we go. There we go.
Sweet. So good afternoon, everybody, or good morning. We're still, we're in that transitional period. And I think a lot of the things that we're going to talk about tonight are, nods and acknowledgements to transitions as well. Yeah, so Leosem Chaniavo, Inepo Damien Montaño. Good morning, blessings, everyone. My name's Damien. My tribes are Pascuayaki and Purepecha. As your professor mentioned, we're colleagues through the academic industrial complex, but also through the community, through circles, through the grid that we've traveled across the world. I've sat with Gilberto in a coffee shop in Orange County near our university, and we've met each other at Mexico City in the zona, for an evening of just like cultural awareness and friendship. So a dear friend and colleague. So thank you, Gilberto, for having me here to speak with your class today. Just an honor to be here as well, and to just see everyone and share this greater work that we're doing in the now and across space and time as well, collectively as students, as educators, as Chicanx and indigenous, indigenous folks, that this work is something that's ongoing and thriving. So a little nod to the work that we're going to unpack as well today. So just really quick, a little bit about myself as well. I'm currently teaching with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I teach in the Ethnic Studies department. I teach Latinx Studies, Queer Ethnic Studies, and American Indian Studies. So the work that I do is, very intersectional. We often see the different representations of our communities and their uniqueness stand tall in these spaces. So I'm really honored to do the work that I do now. I'm working with the university and working with students like yourselves, and working with other educators who are trying to promote these larger conversations about Chicanx and indigenous identity, and where these two intersect and how they flourish and thrive together. So yes, definitely all of that. Today, I'm going to give a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing currently. As of right now, I'm also working with Two-Spirit indigenous folks here located in the Los Angeles area. I'm just to situate ourselves. I know that you're in Cucapá territories. Is Mexicali and the Imperial Valley, all of these areas? We're thinking about the Kumeyaay and all of the folks in your area. I'm currently teaching from Tongva unceded territories here in Long Beach, California. I live 3 miles from a sacred site that is, has been under threat from university policies and construction. And so I'm also thinking about this work as we're doing this, this larger work. Also, I'm somewhat of a liaison for the Seri, the Comcac tribe. They're located in Sonora, in Mexico, in 2 distinct communities, the village of Desemboque and Putachueca. A beautiful community and friends that I've come to know a little over the past decade, doing that work with them in the facilitating of their arts. They're basket makers and ironwood carvers and jewelry makers. So they're a beautiful community as well that we've been doing ongoing work with. Right now, they're one of the only tribes from Mexico that is working with the American Indian Art Market at the Autry in Los Angeles. Before the pandemic, this happened annually every November. Sorry, that's my cat. So he's gonna be clawing at the door. He wants out soon. so, they're one of the only tribes that is working with the American Indian art market right now. So an interesting conversation as well, that there's this bridging of, across what is now an international border. But we know that these are, imposed by settler colonialism. These are constructions that divide, families and communities and tribes as well. Just to segue into that, my tribe is Pascuayaqui, and so our communities are actually located in between these spaces, in these transitional spaces. Some of our villages are in Sonora, and some of our villages are in Arizona. And so our communities have really been rooted in those spaces since the inception or founding or invasion or the settler colonial founding of those spaces, right? Arizona became a state in the early 1900s, and my great grandparents were living there before that was a state. And so, an interesting movement of geographies, but like also of identities as well. Growing up as a Chicano, growing up identifying with that term because my family was that, but we were also many other things. And these identities didn't really emerge until I was about to come into my teens. I think maybe when I was also interested in connecting with my communities and my families and asking these deeper questions about who we are and where our families are from and our identities, and knowing that my mother's family's also Purepecha, and that they, my great grandmothers lived in Michoacan and in the Tres Mezquitas and Uruapan areas, and finding the traces of that identity as well, through so many things, through conversations, through like our traditions that we still practice, through food. Interestingly, every meal is a memory. And so, a lot of the stories in my family have circulated somehow around food. Some of the work that I dabble in is in, food revitalization and, bringing larger consciousness around food awareness. I'll just share this story. I was just sitting with my grandfather. He's going to be 97 on December 19th. What was that?
Your grandfather fought in World War II.
Yes. He's an American Indian, veteran, and and also recently graduated high school. He was an elder that was honored in a graduation ceremony from his high school. Yes, also like someone who worked for the communities here in Orange County and Los Angeles, doing housing development projects in the barrio of Atwood. And so my family also has these greater links to this great work that they've been involved with, social justice and civil rights and awareness. So I only needed to tap into those people to get this knowledge. That's really helped me informed my pedagogy and the praxis that I come from, and the place that I teach from, and the interactions and the company that I keep, and so that's also shared with Gilberto, and Gilberto's work is also reflected towards me. And so but a long segue, that we were actually sharing a story this was the other month, but I actually just posted it on social media, just so that my family can access that larger narrative. And my grandfather was sitting, we were all around the table, and we had pulled out all the documents and the lineage, and we're tracing family. And we do this every so often, go through family like records and connecting who was who. And so this story came up, because my grandfather's family was in movement, and they were living in Arizona, and then they were also movement. They were moving to California. In this whole process, they were, this is the process of moving as from Indians to Chicanos, because of the discrimination that they endured during their lives as Native people in those spaces. So interesting, my grandfather, brought this memory up that him and his father were walking on a street, and a woman in a stagecoach was riding towards them. And I don't know, maybe people parked them in those days too, like we park a car now. There was a space where they rested, these horses, or maybe, and so this woman was riding towards them, and when she approached my grandfather and his father, she actually pulled the reins on the horse. And so the horse, actually stood up, and, he said, I think that she was trying to kill us. And if we hadn't moved, then he would have, then, the horse would have killed them, or just stomped them. And, I thought that was just a jarring memory. Something that at 97 is emerging, it's evoking, at this time in his life. And also, this recognition of food, this other memory that they were sharing is when my grandmother, my great grandmother, Claudina, was passing away. See, at this time, they were already living in LA as Chicanos, like they were already
What time period was
here.
it?
I'm sorry?
What time period was this?
Oh, 1930s,
30s?
20, yeah, not 30, yeah, something around there, circa.
Okay.
And they were already living here in Los Angeles, like on 6th Street in like downtown LA. Like, I've taken my grandpa over there, and it's just like, going through the barrios and seeing that space and how it's developed and evolved, and knowing that like our family like was rooted in that space at one time for this brief moment, because they moved often. And so interestingly, like my great grandmother, or unfortunately, my great grandmother had contracted tuberculosis at that time. And so I think like the medical knowledge of that time was that they should be in like hot, dry weather. And so they moved. They moved back to Arizona, and they were staying in this, I guess, like just makeshift homes, as my grandpa described it. And they actually like got water like in a river, and like bathed in the river. I've actually located that geographically, and I believe the waters that they were using was the Hasayampa. It's a river that's running through parts of Wickenburg in Arizona, and those areas as well. And so, they took my great grandmother back there because of the weather, and she, ended up passing away there in Arizona. And so one of the stories was that it used to get so hot, or the weather was already, it was Arizona. And so to cool down, they would, these men would come by the house, and they'd actually pick up the posts of the bed, and they'd carry the bed outside under this pepper tree that they said was there. And so, they took her out, outside often, maybe for that air. That was the knowledge, right? The medical knowledge that the dry, heat, humid air was there. That air was going to help, like facilitate healing for tuberculosis, but not necessarily the case. And so, she was there. And actually, I think on her final days, when this story was transposed to the family, but she actually asked the kids to go find a desert tortoise. And and so one of them did, and she taught them like how to prepare it and how to get the shell, crack the shell, and how to get the meat out and what to cut and cook, and they were going to make a soup. And she actually needed to add a glass of water every hour. So she was asking someone to bring her a glass of water, every hour. And I think on the third or fourth hour, she had passed already. But the last lesson was a meal, teaching about a preparation of a meal, and like building a foundation for survival, that like we might live in on the land and like use the waters like from this river. Like to other people it might seem like we have nothing, but in essence like we have everything, and like to teach like this last lesson was a way to like carry on this larger a larger history and a larger foundation of keeping traditions alive, and knowing that we have something to go back to. And all of us have a community and a family, and we come from parents, and we have literally thousands of ancestors behind us in this lineage, as we're looking at that work that we're doing in this lifetime, like for you all individually as well. So I draw on like these knowledges and like these stories, and like I share this work in the community. And I was talking or typing this work through social media as well, and one of the tribal members said, hey, like I love that story that you shared. She said, that dish it's still a traditional dish, whether vegan animal rights activism would critique indigenous people's traditional gastronomy, that dish is still something that's present in Native communities. And and she said, I was just, as a child, she said, I was offered that dish in the village in Mexico, when her Chicana family would roll from Arizona to Sonora, and cross the international boundary, this imaginary, the colonial imaginary, to go into her own ancestral spaces, to visit family. And she said she just denied the dish, not because of an ethical or an approach in that manner, but just mainly because she didn't want to eat the turtle. She just said it didn't sound good. And so fair enough that these are one way. This is one way that individuals today are connecting and reconnecting to their food and identity. And so that's something that I do as well, and I'm looking at in my work in small ways, but all of this is what I've drawn and what I've drawn on to form and live in myself and my identity as a Yaqui and a Chicanx and a Native person. Identify also as Two-Spirit. It's part of my identity, something that I've lived into, and it's part of like this great work. It's woven into the work that I do at all times. Gilberto, do I have access to screen share?
You know what? Let me make you co-host. Give me a minute.
Absolutely, yeah. Just as Gilberto's, pulling that up, I'm, also just, drawing on my family and my community and my circles, to always live in my truth and, to do my work as well. Thank you, Gilberto.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see if it works.
you know, and so in some ways I want to, you know, bridge these
Yes.
spaces
Sí,
that we're doing. Yes, I think that's working.
ya
Yeah,
funcionó. Perfecto. Okay.
yeah,
So, hermano, can you send me the PowerPoint so I can post it on Canvas?
absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
So give me a minute, hermano. Guys, so your final, right? You could use Damien Montaño's interview for your final, right? And to prove a point. The PowerPoint will be sent to me by tomorrow or tonight. I'll post it on Canvas and you can use it for your final. All right. Thank you, hermano. Just wanted to say that announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just gonna do a shortened like version of this work, and I'm sharing this work because it's, you know, something that is some of the newer work that I'm trying to formulate around Two-Spirit Thrivements and, you know, people's crossing paths in the throughways of Los Angeles, of Tongva territories, in the Imperial Valley, you know, wherever these throughways and crossroads are happening, you know, and you know, and we're also thinking about these larger discussions that we're going to unpack right now. Yeah, so you know, this for our conversation today, you know, we're gonna walk through this Two-Spirit Thrivements. You know, what does it mean living at the pinnacle of our existence? You know, the work I do is always acknowledging the educational institutions that I teach with and live on. I teach with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is situated on northern Chumash ancestral territories of Yaktichu, Tichu, Yaktilhini, and then also here where I live. I'm honoring, you know, the Tongva people of Havanga, that sacred site, and the people whose lands I'm living on. And then we're also, you know, channeling the Kukapas, the Ipai and Paipai and Kumeyaay communities of San Diego, and all of those diverse communities that, you know, we're acknowledging them. We're acknowledging, you know, also just like our departments, you know, the student organizations that do work around ethnic studies, around Chicano studies, around indigenous studies, and that, you know, fuel and pump energy into this work as well. And then, you know, of course, like my ancestors, our ancestors, you know, which we've already kind of like mentioned them and, you know, welcomed, you know, them into this space, just knowing that we all come from long lineages and large circles of individuals that, you know, have formed us. Just like ideas have, you know, formed this knowledge as well. And so we're thinking about them, you know, in this way, in a good way. And just knowing that, you know, we're doing the work that we're doing, and, you know, we're all, you know, young at heart, you know, in some ways, and we all, you know, are working towards woke, and knowing that learning is a process, and that we're constantly learning in this way. And so, you know, if I leave things out of these conversations, or if I, you know, mention things or fail to acknowledge, you know, certain aspects of individuals or communities or identities, you know, I just, it's you know, I just ask forgiveness to the ancestors as well, you know, because as an educator, I'm also learning, and as I teach, you know, I learn from my students as well, and from you all. So yeah, definitely my praxis. So just a little bit, you know, about Two-Spirit. What is Two-Spirit? I think maybe we've heard this term before, maybe we haven't. You know, a lot
sorry
of
for interrupting. Sorry for
yes,
interrupting, hermano. We talked about that in we read Berens Andua's border art and some of her literature work.
yeah,
Yeah, but we also read Eddie Alvarez,
okay,
our mentor. Now he's
beautiful.
also a student of Eddie Alvarez, and he's also my
Beautiful.
mentor, Eddie Alvarez. So you're having two students of Eddie Alvarez. So yeah,
Yeah.
we read his work, Un Joto para los Mariconex, and praying for healing. So,
Absolutely. Yes. And like Gloria Ansaldúa would say, you know, people listen to what your joteria is saying.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that nod.
Thank
You know, and so I know that your class has, I know that you all have, you know, been introduced to this term, and, you know, some larger understanding of this term as well. You know, so, you know, Two Spirits is like that. It's the crossroads of like a Western and indigenous understanding of sexuality and gender, right, that are often coming into opposition. Like many of the interactions that happened in initial colonization, in the initial taking of spaces, which are now considered Mexico and California and home. And so, yes, you know, we're looking at a crossroads of identity, of gender and sexuality, something that's fluid, identity, gender and sexuality that's fluid and moving in between spaces and worlds. And we're seeing the ways that individuals have, you know, been integrated into these spaces over time, that we'll see in a little bit. We're also thinking about like gender as a range of identities that don't fit within like heteronormative, which is like, right, our patriarchal, our colonial ideas about male and female, right? These ideals that are rooted in settler colonialism, in ideas around the nuclear family, in ideas around gender roles, and you know, who should be doing what in the community. You know, for Two Spirits, there's very specific gender roles and spiritual roles that we're facilitating for our communities, and that we're called in to do for our communities. Currently, you know, we're contemporary Native people that are doing, you know, continuing and reclaiming these roles, but we've also historically had these gender systems within our communities as well. You know, we're just thinking about the Mushes from Juchitán, and you know that this is a gender role that survived Spanish conquest and invasion and colonialism into like this thriving and thrivance. You know, the Mushes are living in one of those spaces that, you know, we would consider thrivance. You know, these are people also individuals who, you know, who might identify with, you know, having, you know, male and female spirits, or, you know, a person's sexual or gender and spiritual identity, the intersections of all of those. So we're looking at that in terms of Two Spirit. You know, where did this term come from? It came from a gathering of Native people, the third annual gathering of gay and lesbian Native people near Winnipeg in Manitoba, which is in Canada, in 1990. This was proposed, it was agreed on by all the activists, educators, elders, all the community people present at that time. It was utilized as an umbrella term as well, to gather the diverse approaches to gender and sexuality among the many nations across Turtle Island. And we're looking at Turtle Island as the North American continent, right? And which in some ways connects Mexico and what is now the US and what is Canada, right? All of these spaces as you know, as one land, right? And so, you know, this term was created like in this space for the Native community, and it remains like an exclusive and sacred term for Native people, you know, of Turtle Island, of these spaces. And so this isn't like, you know, we're not looking at like non-Native people who don't do work in Native communities identifying as Two Spirit, right? That's somewhat of like a cultural appropriation, you know. And even though this term is new, it's an old concept, right? This is a new term that's in English. You know, out of all the languages that these communities speak, we have 567 federally recognized tribes in what is now called the United States. And I believe 110 of those are in the state of California. So we have a very large diversity of tribes in the state of California. And I believe, and maybe someone can do the research, I believe there's about 80 to 90 tribes, I'm sure more, that are seeking federal recognition as well. And so we're looking at like the diverse communities that Native people are, right? That Native American is not a culture. There's many cultures and communities within the umbrella of what is Native American. And so like Two Spirit, you know, there's many identities and gender and sexual identities within all of these Native communities. And so Two Spirit, one of those terms that's, you know, drawing them all together. I'm sorry. Where was it? Let's go. Let's see here. I'm actually going here. Sweet. I just wanted to touch on that note, that this term also, has a root. There's a term called berdache. This is a dated and offensive term. This is a term that was described by colonial records.
What's the term again, hermano?
Oh, I'm sorry, a berdache.
Okay.
Berdache on this last. Yes, this is one of the terms that was historically used for gender nonconforming indigenous peoples by settler artists and folks who were coming across these communities. And I say artists because specifically this work that we're doing, follows the work of artists that will actually we might get to. And so I'm also keeping in mind our time. So yes, I just wanted to touch on that note while we were there. And so, in regards to
Damien, someone has a question. Go ahead. What does the word berdache mean? You can say, stand up and ask him the question. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was that? What does the word berdache mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Berdache actually has its roots in, I believe in French. It's a French word, but is also rooted in a Persian term. And berdache was used. It meant that it was like a kept boy. It was like a term for a slave. It was this deep colonial term of a dark term of power dynamics and relationality to conquest. And so this term actually was like derogatory, like a really derogatory term, that was used towards Native people. So thank you. Yeah, thanks for that clarification. And we're gonna unpack that as well. And so for the purposes of this conversation, it's like, what is thrivance? As we're looking at this history that we just touched on, which these elements are trickling through, right? Elements of conquest, of disempowerment, of deterritorialization, of trauma and violence and abuse, right? All of these things that have occurred for Native people, for Two-Spirit communities, for marginalized communities as well. And we're thinking about like, well, what is thrivance? Like, how do we move like beyond these stories, acknowledging the pain of the past, and how do we transform that into like power? How can we dream and create a future that's different from the now, that's inclusive for all of us, our families, our communities, a space where we can thrive, and to thrive is to enact thrivance, right? We're transforming our pains into power, and we're creating, we're dreaming and envisioning newness in the now, right now. And so it's also a blending, right? We're looking at transitional. How do we form words if we're going to be a wordsmith in this scholarly work that you're all doing? We're writing and writing and writing and reading and reading. And, this is the way that like our minds actually like break beyond the boundaries that, are imposed like through the academic industrial complex, through our education system, through, colonization, and the ways that affects the stories that are told in our family, right? We're finding resistance, so if we're blending thriving and resistance, maybe that means that we're living in thrivance. We're in resistance towards regimes and power structures that uphold systemic violence and inequalities and racism. We stand against administrations that deterritorialize, that disenfranchise Native communities and queer communities and and communities that have been marginalized by the larger nation state. You know, we stand in resistance towards, you know, colonization and towards the removal of our children from our communities, towards the violence. We stand in resistance towards the violence towards queer communities, and, you know, Two-Spirit youth and Chicanx youth who are living and finding, you know, their identities right now. And then, you know, maybe we're in remembrance too. I'm thinking about, you know, is remembrance part of thrivance, or is it resistance? We're thinking about the suffix change. And, you know, if it's remembrance, we're thinking about remembering. You know, I'm drawing on larger conversations that queer scholar Deborah Miranda, a Chumash scholar, you know, talks about this concept of remembering, you know, that the jarrito, right, this little clay jar we had, you know, was broken, and the pieces that remain, you know, is the is the tragedy of the violence, you know, happening. And there's no way to recreate this pot from the shards, but we can, you know, we can pick that up and remember it, remember each piece, every member of that piece, you know, into a larger mosaic. We can envision and create and dream a larger model that can help us now in the present, and will enable us to move forward in a better way in the future, and having agency to do that, like as Native people, as indigenous, as indigenous people, you know, we have agency to live and like change and like create new songs, and to continue living our lives and enacting policies for our communities that are beneficial. You know, we're thinking also about this term survivance, survivance that has you know, this term was used also by Anishinaabe scholar Gerald Visner. You know, I suggest his work if you have time to read for fun soon after the semester quarter's over.
It's almost over.
Yeah, it's almost over. I know, we're done.
It's
It's almost over. And, you know, so, you know, we're going to survive that as well. And we're going to move beyond surviving. We're going to thrive, you know, and survivance, you know, and this renunciation of like of the dominant narrative, that native tragedy, of victimry, you know, that Mexico was conquered, and the story, you know, ends there, that, you know, native lands were taken, and now that's why we have the United States. You know, these very flat conversations that happen. You know, we're renouncing like these dominant narratives, and in showing and displaying, you know, that we live today, in the now, in the present. Yes, and this ants that we're adding to the word also, the suffix change, you know, moves us in that word to go beyond the ruins of colonization, to go beyond the ruins of these narratives that have happened.
Right. Hermano, time is wrapping up. We're ending. Yeah.
And I want to what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and just email, you know, this PowerPoint to everyone, or to you. You can upload that on the Canvas platform, and, you know, people have time to look through the rest of this work. And you know, just a note as well throughout this work, I highlight some Two-Spirit folks that are doing some really important work in Los Angeles. Yeah, and so I suggest everyone to look at their links, to find them on social media, to support the work that they're doing right now as well. Yeah, so
we have time for questions.
Thank you, Gilberto.
Yeah, we have 10 minutes for questions. Guys, do you have any questions or comments for Damien Montaño? Okay, so stand up, or yeah, so you can, yeah. All right, Damien, this is Ismael.
Hello.
Hey, how are you, Ismael?
Again, the question is, can a Two-Spirit person, do they have to be a sort of like queerness, or like can it be a heterosexual with two spirits in the spiritual lens, or cómo la ve?
Oh, that's an interesting, question. You know, Two-Spirit connected to, you know, sexuality and gender. So there's an intersection of that happening as well. You know, and this is a complicated question as well, because what we frame as queerness and as straight, like as heteronormativity in Western culture, you know, differs in so many ways from indigenous perspectives of and acknowledgments of those roles. You know, the two are connected so intricately, and so, you know, it's not a term that straight natives are using, that hetero, you know, natives are using. It's not a term in that manner. You know, Two-Spirit, you know, comes from, again, these greater cultural roles that are deeper, you know, and so there's a flux there in that question as well, that I don't think we have time for, like in this, you know, in this little bracket of time, but I'd love to, you know, unpack that further as we unpack that identity. But, you know, in short, you know, not a term that straight Native people are using. You know, people who identify with like male and female energies as well, you know, find, like, you know, this is where the exclusivity of like Two-Spirit comes in, like as a term coming like from someone who's living in a community that's practicing and doing this work, and is acknowledged in that community. Yeah, so I think a lot of things that are to unpack in that. Feel free to reach out if you ever want to chat. Yeah, and just unpack that further. Yeah, thank you for that, Ismael.
Anyone else?
Any other questions?
Questions or comments? No? All right, Damien. Well, hermano, pues muchas gracias.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for your time. And yeah.
Oh, and guys, Damien is grading. He has to turn in grades today, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, yeah, yes.
So he took time, and he was really busy yesterday. So muchas gracias, hermano.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you all. You all have a good day and stay well and take care of yourselves and each other.
Hermano, I'll be going in a couple of weeks. I'll keep you posted. All right.
Okay, sweet. Yeah. Take care, brother.
Un fuerte abrazo. Say hi to your mom, to Jimmy, to your father, your grandfather, a todos.
A todos también.
Cuídate, hermano. Hasta luego.
Okay, cuídate.
Bye.